Hey folks, and welcome to another video from A Plain Truth 2. I want to get into the mud floods. Was California an island below water civilizations that existed that most are unaware of today? But California, was it an island as recently as 150 to 200 years ago? Let's do a little exploration. This is a 17th century map by Nicholas Sanson. Shows California depicted as an island. It's one of 800 such maps collected by Glenn McLaughlin, recently turned over to Stanford University, and we'll never hear from them again. It comes from this site here, and this was back in an article in 2012 from the Los Angeles Times. And they say 4 decades later, this collection of 800 maps, all showing California as an island, is making a splash in academia, and to both California lovers and haters, promotes the sentiment that the state, even not a physical island, remains a cultural and political one, no doubt. McLaughlin recently turned his collection over to Stanford Branner's Earth Science Library, and it was part donation, thought to be worth about $2.1 million. Shows layers upon layers of history. But Stanford concludes it's not real. Bullshit. So this is from CaliforniaAsAnIsland.org. Sometime in the past, before the Ice Age, most of Western North America and probably the whole world was accurately mapped by technologically advanced people. Now, folks, I want to take you back to before the Kali Yuga cycle, back to the days of the ancients who built pyramids. We still can't figure out why, how, purpose, where they got the limestones from 500 miles away on ships, how they got them there, how they excavated over 13 acres, put up 3.5 million stones, weighing between 2 and 3 tons, in perfect symmetry with northwest, east, and south alignment with the stars and the maps of the heavens. And they were mapped up all around the world. And we also know the Sphinx was buried in sand quite a lot too, and that's another one to add to the mud fossil story. So anyway, these ancient source maps were used by map makers until the 1700s to fill in the vast unknown areas on the western side of North America. You can bet they're domiciled in the catacombs of the Vatican. In the following series, I analyze Johann Swedenboom's California as an Island map. I show the makers of the original map possessed a detailed knowledge of geography of western North America. 1700s, folks. Correlation of features on the map of actual locations demonstrates the map is very accurate. This guy has a degree in engineering, 1976 from University of California, Los Angeles. The Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings by Charles Hapgood. This is a very important book. It was written in 1516, which totally destroys current map making and cartographers' maps of today. It shows that the Antarctic was ice-free and a bunch of other things. But Hapgood showed that the Paris map was a compilation of at least 4 source maps that fit together into a mosaic. Ptolemy is the most famous geographer of the ancient world. He worked in Alexandria, Egypt in the 2nd century AD in the greatest library of the ancient world. He had at his command all the accumulated geographical information of the world. He was acquainted with mathematics. He shows in his greatest work, the Geographia, a modern scientific mentality. Can we lightly assume that the medieval sailors of the 14th century, without any knowledge and without any modern instruments except a rudimentary compass and without mathematics, could produce a more scientific product? More importantly, Hapgood's research showed that old maps contain geographical features that should not have been known to mankind. The Orientius Phineas map of Antarctica, for example, shows mountain ranges that should have been covered by glaciers for hundreds of thousands of years, and have recently been discovered under the ice by modern scientific techniques. How were these map makers able to map these mountains? Over 250 maps from the 17th and 18th centuries was shown as California as an island. This is the McLaughlin maps we were referring to earlier. Dates back to 1621. Island maps continued into the 1800s in the site of Spanish explorer Father Kino, Jesuit, demonstrating California's connectedness in 1705 by walking there from Mexico. But since then, no accurate maps. Map makers continue to supply the market using ancient sources. For the first 300 years of colonial rule, this is how the description of the map goes. For the first 300 years of the Western colonial rule, the Southwest was still under colonial rule of Spain, who closely guarded all information provided by its explorers. The Spanish explorers did their best to collect geographic information via fragmentary field maps that found their way back to Spain, where they were in turn added to a master map that was guarded with the utmost secrecy by the Casa de Contratación in Seville, mapping and imagination in the Great Basin. So here we go back to Spain. Spain invented the Columbus landing in the United States. America never did. All the rest they invented up, the round ball spinning earth and all the rest of this stuff. Remember, Spain is the Spanish Inquisitions and where the Jesuits took their hold again. In light of all this, it's not surprising that it took so long for map makers in the rest of Europe to produce an up-to-date map of the western U.S. and to discontinue the use of sources showing California as an island. The original of the sources used by Vagabonds and all map makers in this area is unknown, but a writer in 1622, notes, California, which is now found to be an island stretching south from 22 degrees to 42 degrees, which means they're already mapping longitude and latitude, and lying almost directly north and south, as may appear on the map that the land which I have seen here in London brought out of Holland. Indeed, many of the maps produced of the next century came out of Holland, including the one to which we'll pay special attention, the Vigbooms map. How the sources go to Holland would probably be an interesting story. So I want to take you back to the Great Flood of 1862. The Great Flood of 1862. Now remember, the fallen angels, the Nephilim, were said to have fallen out of God's graces and came down to earth in the 1850s to 1870s. Now this is when all the word dinosaur was created. The whole stories about the round ball earth were created. The school system, public school education system was formalized. All the Darwinism and survival of the fittest and Isaac Asimov and all the writers, the fiction writers writing about the stories that came from the 1850s and 1870s. This is where a lot of our learned history, his story, has come from the periods of times from the 1850s to the 1870s, as we'll see further. So is this when they made it all up and changed the whole narrative of our entire history? That's what I'm coming to learn more and more every day. So the Great Flood was the largest flood in recorded history in Oregon, Nevada, and California, occurring from December 1861 to January 1862, caused by the Ark Storm. Now you'll note that they just came out recently the other day and said that California is going to be having another Ark Storm. So this is where I started researching. I went, holy crap. It was preceded by weeks of continuous rains and snows in very high elevations that began in Oregon in November 1861 and continued to January 1862. A record amount of rain contributed to a flood that extended from the Columbia River southward to western Oregon, through California to San Diego, and extended as far inland as Idaho in the Washington Territory, Nevada and Utah Territory, and Arizona in the western New Mexico Territory. The Ark Storm dumped an equivalent of 10 feet of rainfall in California in the form of rain and snow over a period of 43 days. 10 feet of rainfall in a little over 5 weeks? Are you kidding me? Have you heard about this, folks? Did you learn about this before? Why not? Well, here we'll get into a little more. I didn't know about this. I grew up right down the road from Petaluma. I didn't know anything about this. Nobody does. Why aren't we taught this in school? Why aren't we taught flat earth in school? So things were not taught, folks. Why aren't we taught what date Washington, D.C. was founded, folks? Or what the District of Columbia means, folks? Why aren't we taught any of this? Why aren't we taught our rights to question authority? All right, first winter storms hit Petaluma, but now we got something to go back in history. 154 years ago, floods in the winter of 1861 to 62, unprecedented, devastating, and ruinous. It was impossible to approximate the number of lives lost. Oh, really? Sounds like here. The Transcontinental Railroad was underway, and the new California legislatures of 61-62 had to convene in San Francisco because Sacramento was virtually washed off the map. What was left of the entire city could only be reached by boat in 1862. What was left of the entire city could only be reached by boat in the year later, 1862. By 1862, the beginning of the year, the water level in those rivers was 18 feet above the highest mark ever recorded before or since. 18 feet higher. Did they have geoengineering back then, folks? The mind wonders. Sacramento was drowned out of existence. Now we're saying this went all the way from San Diego up to Washington, out to Idaho, down to Utah, over through Nevada. This was a major league event. Are we taught any of this? No. 72 inches of rain had fallen in the San Francisco area between November 9th and January 14th. November 9th, January 14th, in 2 months, we had 72 inches of rain, 5 feet of rain. 80,000 people lived in the Sonoma County, Sonoma and Marin counties then, but it was estimated that only 500 people died, and most of them were Chinese laborers, so it didn't really matter. Unbelievable. 500 deaths, just like they're doing here, folks. We don't do body counts. 25% of all buildings in the state had been flooded and ruined. Even the Mojave Desert and Los Angeles Basin had become lakes. So here's a lot of your evidence that California could have very well formed from the floods, or that was much bigger. And here's some imaging here. You can see the California and Oregon coast, and we'll zoom in. And you can see the shelf here. It's much higher. And this is what they're talking about, we're going to get into, is this area here, this 200 miles out. And then also pay attention to these lines coming in right here at Point Conception near Eureka. And this is coming in right near Santa Rosa. But look at these bluffs. Look at how much it drops off from here. So it was... Oops, I got to move this over, sorry. Okay, so look at how much it drops over here. You can see where this could have been very well extended out. That could have been the whole coastline in a previous. And also look at all the underlying, the Central Valley laying much lower. And then look at how everything was green above. And then off here in Nevada, you've got desert. So it very well could have happened, and the map shows it's possible if you can believe Google Maps. Not sure what I believe anymore. But I want to get into, let's start here. So before I get into a little more of the technical details about how California was an island previously, as little as 150, 200 years ago, the mud flood is something that would be considered, along with the Tartarian Empire that we're learning about now, Scythia and whatnot, that was formed after Pangaea. Literally, folks, we are rewriting history. We should call it her story, just to differentiate between his bullshit story of what we're being sold for hundreds of years and taught in classrooms, and we're learning it's all a bunch of baloney. And you can see map after map, from Paris to China to all over the world. There was civilizations that existed below us. I posted about Bath, England, when I went and visited there, and you had to walk way down into the baths that were well below street level. And you can see pictures here from Paris and England and Kakistan and all over the world. You see evidence that there was civilization existing well below where we live today in many, many areas around the world. And we're also seeing similar style buildings around the world as well. So how did they all know how to build the same type of buildings? This is what we were sold. Oh, we came by covered wagon, blah, blah, blah. But as this site, stolenhistory.org chronicles, look at all the similar buildings. Look at all the supposed Greek and Roman columns that were everywhere. These are time different periods of hundreds and possibly 1,000 years difference, yet they all have the same type of architecture. How can this be? How can this be possible unless there was one group that was organizing and building all over the world very similar structures? Or did they all just come up with the same idea, even though they're different civilizations having different experiences? Iran, Poland, Vietnam, Pakistan, India, South Africa, Thailand, Turkey, Sri Lanka, Germany, Ukraine, China, all similar architectures, folks. New Zealand, Singapore, Sweden, Indonesia, Kenya, Egypt, Brazil, Australia, Canada. There was uniformity, folks. There was uniformity in building that went back, like I said, centuries and centuries, if not millenniums, of similar trend buildings. Now back to the underwater, the flood maps. What we see is that there were civilizations that existed well underwater that were, you can actually go diving down off of Alexandria and off of the coast of Japan, and also off the Gulf of Mexico. They're said to be civilizations that existed 150 feet to 300 feet below what the sea level is at now. And this was back in Cleopatra, discovered in 1998. Stephen Schwartz has a great book by using psychic abilities to discover a lot of this ancient ruins. But here you can see ruins of Cleopatra's palace. This is in Japan. These are pyramids that were built below where land was before, that now waters have covered up. I mean, this is 150 feet to 300 feet down. Look at how big these stones are, folks, in Mexico. And then these were done by highly sophisticated craftsmen. Here's the Lion City of Qingdao in China. I mean, how did all these exist? Well, there had to be a major flood. There had to be a major flood that covered all this up. I'll put this in the show notes as well. But we also have evidence like Easter Island. Everybody shows, remember they show you just the heads, but then they started excavating and found out, whoa, there's much more going on here, folks. This is a much bigger story than we've been sold and told. And like I said, all we were ever shown was the statues that were carved above ground, and then they tried to show you, yeah, how we move 3, 4, 5 tons up hills and around everywhere. They don't know how they did it, not even close, but they never disclosed what was underneath. They never disclosed that there was massive construction that occurred below the surface of what we know today. All right, back to California. Vagaboond includes places and names from Spanish explorers that are fitted to features at about right latitude in the source maps. Features that are still here today can be identified from his place names such as Point Conception on the Pacific coast above Santa Barbara, features on the map that no longer exist such as rivers and the ocean passageway through Nevada may carry the name by a given explorer to something that appears today at that latitude. But the map may bear little resemblance to today's geography and what explorers saw. Besides the obvious fact that California is separated from the mainland, there are a number of other things to note. The Rio del Norte, running prominently south from the lake in Wyoming, empties well south of where the Colorado River meets the Gulf today, and so it is not Colorado. It goes on. Okay, and this is the map I was just showing you here about the big bluff that was out here that could have possibly been the coastline of the island of California. California was an island, folks. And the overlay of the map to the left in the northeast corner of the island forms a point that is created by the mountain range ending at the Willamette National Forest east of Eugene, Oregon. The flat top follows the visible break in the coastal range just south of Eugene. Many California's and island maps from the 1600s and the 1700s show the north end of the island as the distinct M. McLaughlin characterized maps by whether they have a flat or indented top throughout his catalog in California. The oceans were about 300 feet higher at the time the map was made. Let's read that again. The oceans were about 300 feet higher at the time the map was made. As the ocean level dropped, the lower level of the mountains north of this flat coastline were exposed, with the Willamette Valley between the two ranges. The Great Salt Lakes east of the northeast corner are evidence that there was a lot of salt water left there after the ocean receded. Now we know how the inland Great Salt Lake got its salt. Another mystery solved in her story. South of the Pacific side, from the Flat Island top, we find a section from the top of the map of Point Conception that extends 200 miles farther into the Pacific than it does today. 200 miles further into the Pacific than it does today. Two significant rifts extend across the Pacific, starting at the Hawaiian Island chain and meeting the continent near Eureka at Point Conception. They're talking about these lines right here, folks. See these big lines? These big ridge lines? This is what they're talking about. All right, where was I? The northern rift continues to the Atlantic Ocean at New York, and the southern rift continues to the active earthquake zone at the coast of North Carolina. These rifts gradually buckled the continent from east to west, starting during the flood with the Appalachians. The Rockies were pushed up next after the flood, then the Wasatch Range of Utah and the folded ridges of Nevada finally later after the flood and after the Big Boom's map was made. The Sierra Nevada and California Coast Range were pushed up. The formation of the last two ranges pushed the coastline of the map east over 200 miles where it is today. North of the Pacific Ocean floor rift of Eureka, it appears the land subducted. So the northern rift continues to the Atlantic Ocean at New York, and the southern rift continues the active earthquake zone at the coast of North Carolina. These rifts gradually buckled the continent from east to west, as we said. The Rockies were pushed up next after the flood, then the Wasatch Range and the folded ridges of Nevada. Finally, later, after the flood, and after the Big Boom's map was made, the Sierra Nevada and California coastal ranges were pushed up. The formation of these last two ranges pushed the coastline of the map east by over 200 miles where it is today. North of the Pacific Ocean floor rift at Eureka, it appears the land subducted. This would have pushed a large amount of the Pacific Plate under the large volcanic hotspot at Yellowstone. South of Eureka, it was compressed and pushed upwards to form the mountain ranges as described above. In this map of California geology, quote, older metamorphic and sedimentary rocks, end quote, are dark blue. This is a sharp break in the rock at the rift at Eureka. This block of sedimentary rocks south of the rift down to the Point Conception have been pushed east by about 50 miles. The east coast of the island, starting at the north in the Gulf of California, follows the base of the mountains on the east side of the Imperial Valley, skirts neatly around the east end of the Angel's Crest Mountains at Big Bear, treks across the desert on the east edge of the Antelope Valley. This is the Sierra Nevadas area they're talking about, southern Sierras. There is clearly a break in the features of the valley floor on the east and west sides of the coastline, as shown in this map. Another source of information for the eastward movement of the coastline is the Pacific Ocean floor. As we talked about, the U.S. Geological Service has provided a map of the ocean floor showing elevation. So here's an overlay of the map. To the left in the northeast corner of the island forms a point that is created by the mountaintop range of the Willamette National Forest east of Eugene. So here's Baja California, here's the California Central Basin, Oregon up here. This map over here is what they're talking about, is what the old California, the island of California, used to look like. The flat top follows a visible break in the coastal range just south of Eugene. Many quote California's island maps from the 1600s show the north end of the island distinct M. We already covered that. Please excuse the repetition I just did there. All right, so closing it up. This is from ScottishRiteCalifornia.org, and if you'll look at most of the towns, cities, municipalities where you live, you'll notice that the Freemasons founded it 6 months before the state, just like May 1st, 1776, Adam Weishaupt, Freemason, Scottish Rite Freemason, founded the United States, and then July 4th, 1776, the United States was founded. So the Freemasons were here before us. So the Scottish Rite spread throughout the eastern and southern states during the first half of the 19th century. Sovereign Grand Commander Albert Pike, who's buried in Washington, D.C. in the mausoleum of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry building opposite the state capitol building. Anybody? Why is he buried in Washington, D.C.? Former Ku Klux Klan founder. He was determined to introduce the Rite to the West Coast. In the spring of 1861, remember the mud floods, 1861, 1862, the rains? The Supreme Council established a grand consistory in California. So is this when they started making up the stories, folks? They started making it up then, or started reoccupying after the floods. And here, this is the history of the Freemasons. In 1850, the same year that California became a state, the Grand Lodge of California was established in Sacramento. Actually, it was founded right before it. They don't tell you that, but the Grand Lodge was founded 6 months before. Today, the Grand Lodge of California boasts more than 65,000 members and 340 lodges located throughout the state, making it one of the largest Grand Lodges in the world. And just to close this out, so when we talk about who they are that are doing all this, the Freemasons, you can see down here at the bottom, the Masons, the New Age Movement, Opus Dei, Club of Rome. But then you have the Mafia, the International Bankers, Council of Foreign Relations, the Illuminati, and then the Jesuits and the Vatican and the 13 satanic bloodlines above them. But I just wanted to go and final close that showing you all these secret societies, most of you, here's the 13 satanic family bloodlines of Europe above them all. But to understand that the Freemasons is the lower level, below all these levels I'm showing you here. Mothers of Darkness, Maria Conquering Wind, Old Venetian Black Nobility, Bilderberg Group you've heard of, Skull and Bones you've heard of, but how about Brotherhood of Death, Chapter 322. So look at all these names, folks. This is a compilation I've made over a period of time. But how many of you know about these secret societies? This is the they. They're not some just one-off group of families. They're highly organized over centuries to give us the lies and the distortions and the untruths they've been laying on us, but we're just waking up to it. We're just beginning the dawn of our new understanding. It is no longer the darkness because we see the light now. And that light, that darkness is now our shadow. We own the darkness. The Babylon Brotherhood, I own you. Black Hand, Shriners, Share International, Knights of Columbus, and they always start doing good things, saying all the good things they're doing. But then above the higher levels, they get into the darkness. Anyway, that's all I got. Island, California was an island. Who knew? Anyway, we'll keep sharing and caring and love one another, and we'll catch you next video. Peace.